Testing, testing. This is Stefano from VOX podcast. Together with me today from Nairobi, Kenya is Diane Ha. Hi, Diane. And from Dhaka, Bangladesh, we have Daniel. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for joining us.
So, thanks for the invite.
Daniel, thank you for joining us. So everyone, this is Daniel Ciganovic, who is the founder of SolShare. And you can check them out at me-solshare, SolShare.com. And this is where energy meets finance with their solar trading platform. So I found out about SolShare through a pitch session where you guys were presenting and walked away with 50 grand, just like that. So I thought it'd be interesting to investigate and figure out, like learn more about SolShare basically. So Daniel, can you start us off with telling us the story behind the startup? How does it start and why?
How and why, yeah. So we basically started in 2014. I have to say all of us, all the founders of SolShare, like we are three, the other one is Sebastian, Groh, and Kirchhoff. So we all started, we are all German, and we basically experienced a very nice time, at least in our perception in Germany, which was the German, what we call the Energiewende. So which was like maybe one of the first countries in the world which totally opened up the energy markets for anyone who would like to sell electricity, which was a big change. And we at this point, we were working for a consultancy company in Germany. And this consultancy company called Microenergy International, they are basically focused on microfinance and financing of energy systems. And the founders of the company, they came up with the idea they came up with the idea based on an experience they made here in Bangladesh. What many people don't know is Bangladesh is actually one of the biggest markets in the world for distributed energy systems. So what they started doing here in the late 90s was they distributed a lot of solar home systems, so small solar systems for people in rural areas. It's a panel, a battery. I think many people are familiar with this, but Bangladesh actually is the biggest market for this. So up till today, we have around 5 to 6 million of these systems installed, but what we basically saw is these are all standalone systems. So the systems which only one household uses. And we found this very interesting because the version we knew from Germany was we had an electricity grid and then people were basically allowed to start feeding into the grid. And in Bangladesh, we basically had a different story where you basically saw you have millions of households not having a grid, but having an own energy system. And we identified a certain inefficiency here because the problem with a standalone system is that basically you will not always be able to utilize all the energy you have generated. And there might be other days where you actually need more energy than your system generates. But what we found out over the year is that the systems in Bangladesh had around 30% of the energy which they produced, the households could not use, because usually the situation here was that at 2 or 3 p.m. in the day, the batteries are full, but the sun is still shining. So then the energy can't go anywhere, and people usually use the energy in the evening. So what we basically thought is, okay, why not making this energy accessible to somebody else? And yeah, this was basically a very straightforward idea, a little bit inspired from what we saw in Germany, where we thought, like, okay, why don't we take these solar home systems and start connecting them with each other, with the physical infrastructure, and really enabling to trade electricity with each other. And the other nice benefit we saw in there was that we could also give basically energy to those people who could not afford a solar home system yet. So that was basically the idea of SolShare, which then Sebastian took back in 2013 to Stanford. He participated in the Stanford Ignite program with this idea, which was taken on by them. So he was one of the 5 winners of this. There's 30 participants, so then on 5 business ideas they worked on. So he basically, they worked on this. That was also where the name was created, SolShare, which is basically very simple. I mean, here initially it was inspired from the Spanish word for soul, so sharing the sun, but solar share also makes it very, very, very easy. And yeah, I think all of us were very hands-on people. So at the end of this whole experience which Sebastian had, he was basically challenged in the way of, oh, that's a nice idea, have you tried it out? And he had to say no. So he was the first one who decided then to come here to Bangladesh and just say like, okay, that's the perfect market for it. We have so many solar home systems here. They are all in off-grid areas, so there is no grid. We found out pretty early that there's also, in terms of regulation, Bangladesh was very favorable. So he moved in 2013, started more working on the research part. And then in 2014, we actually started actively working on the company. At this point, I was still working out of Berlin, Germany. And then I moved here also in January 2015. Yeah, and since then we have been working on this idea to create a new kind of energy market. That's how we usually see it.
That's brilliant. I love this combination of, sustainability and, like avoiding waste in general. So that's wonderful. Now I guess digressing a little bit, on the personal side, I'm just trying to imagine three guys coming from Germany, coming into Bangladesh and trying to start this up. How was it like when you guys first moved here? What were some, maybe issues or surprises, pleasant or unpleasant, that you discovered?
Well, there's for sure to be very straightforward, there is a different work culture here in Bangladesh than what we have in Germany. I think the German work culture is very based on rules. Germans are very disciplined and very easy to get them in line. That was for sure a different experience we had here in Bangladesh, because one of the first things we of course realized was when we moved to Bangladesh and we were with three Germans that we cannot pull this off without a lot of local support. So until today, the company is basically, yes, there are 3 Germans and the rest 60 people which we have in the company are all Bangladeshis. We also try to, as early as possible, try to get as many local staff here into management positions and so on. In terms of, as I said, these differences in the work culture, it's still something we're working on, which is also for me especially one of the most exciting parts, because I'm also mainly responsible for the company development, which also means like how you develop such an organization. I also have to say that when we came here, the startup ecosystem in Bangladesh was still pretty small. There was not such a big focus on this yet. Like the typical things also where people wanted to work in is like banking sector, like all these more like stable kind of environment. But the other thing we also found out here, which brought us a lot of advantages, is I think in the South Asian part of the world, like India and especially Bangladesh, it's a very interesting work culture you see, because I think people have learned pretty early to do a lot of things on their own. I think that's also why Bangladesh was maybe one of the markets where microfinance picked up so quickly and so went pretty big. I mean, we have the Grameen Bank here, for example. Muhammad Yunus who's from Bangladesh, won the Nobel Peace Prize for his microfinancing efforts in 2006. And it's all based on this, like the culture here is really a lot of like people usually don't wait for a solution; they take things into their own hand. Which, as I said, it makes it very hard to often regulate people and tell them like, okay, there's a rule, please follow it, because they just do it their own way. But I think that's a very nice thing for a startup, and I think that's something we are still benefiting of until today. It's really a lot of people here are very good in improvising, and I think that's something you need. Like every day, something new happens. The other thing is, of course, yes, sometimes, or until today, I'm still often complaining about that certain structures are not in place, but that's just on the bureaucracy you have to deal with. I say, for example, like it took us 18 months to set up the company. Like these kind of processes are still relatively inefficient. So there are things where we are suffering there, but as I said, it's an adventure, and I think that's also something all of us, when we came here, we were also looking for. We were ready for a challenge, and yeah, we for sure got a good challenge here.
That's brilliant. Tell us a bit more about your platform. So how does it work from the perspective of, you know, if I have a home and an off-grid solar and I want to maybe make some money and I want to share this, the overage that I have of solar power, as well as on the back end, what's going on and how this works.
Yeah. So first of all, what we always say, like one of the reasons why we started our platform here in Bangladesh, where people can basically trade electricity with each other, was that we found 2 world records here in Bangladesh. The one is the highest distribution of solar home systems in the world. So what is estimated until today is like that around 5 to 6 million households here in Bangladesh already have these so-called solar home systems, small solar panel, battery, and so on. But the other thing is we have one of the biggest mobile money providers in the world here, which is called bKash. So many people, I think, know about M-Pesa in Kenya, but we also have a very big player here in the country, which is called bKash. And that basically means that they have already distributed a really, really big digital payment platform in the country. So we started with a very, very good ground conditions. And what we basically just did is like, okay, we saw all these solar home systems are there. There's a financing mechanism for this. So there we don't need to deal with it so much. I mean, also don't need to deal with it so much. And then we basically, we could fully focus on what we thought was our role there, being basically the technology provider and the solution provider for making this trade possible. So it works in a very straightforward way. The first thing we developed was an energy meter. It's a bi-directional energy meter, which we had to develop ourselves, which then goes into every house, which becomes part of our grid. Then what we offer these houses was basically where we told them like, okay, if you have more energy than you need, you can sell the energy. If you need more energy than you can produce yourself, or maybe you don't even have an own solar home system, you can buy this energy. And our main role within this is really that we become the market regulator, because this is really a totally open energy market, and we are working in an unregulated area. So in Bangladesh, we are in the lucky situation that the system we are doing doesn't fall under any regulation. So there's no regulation in terms of price. There's no regulation in terms of who is allowed to sell electricity, who is allowed to buy, and so on. So this is really like, it was like a clean field for us. And we needed to fill all these gaps. So I think our business model is not that much different from any other sharing economy model. I know at the very beginning, the Asian Development Bank, they called us the Uber of the off-grid world, because that's basically what we are doing. The only difference, what we always said, is we have an infrastructure perspective here too, because most of the other sharing economy companies, they don't need to think that much about the infrastructure. Yes, Airbnb works with the houses which are already there, and they don't need to be interconnected. Uber already works with the cars which are there, and they have the streets. What we worked with was the solar home systems, which are already there, but we also needed to think about the grid infrastructure itself. Yes, how to interconnect these houses with each other, also how to finance this grid infrastructure. So these are basically the 2 aspects we're in. We need to supply the infrastructure, think about how it's set up in the most efficient way. And then, of course, the most interesting part is that we are in the role of regulating and organizing and providing a solution to manage local electricity markets.
Brilliant. I have a couple of follow-ups on that, but Stefano, feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, I mean, many questions I would like to ask. Like, one of the first thing I'd like to ask is about Bangladesh itself. I read that Dhaka is the most densely populated city in the world, and Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world. And you were saying that some of the inefficiency, they are probably driving you crazy after a few years. I was wondering, for instance, traffic. Moving around is probably just it's probably difficult to move things around, and the fact that you have to build the grid, probably the inefficiencies you will find from small logistic to big logistic magnified, is it?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, you're saying many right things here. Yes, Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world, which has a lot of challenges, like things building up infrastructures which can basically channel all of this. Traffic is one of the best examples. I think the average speed of traffic for Bangladesh is somewhere between 8 to 12 kilometers per hour, which makes things, of course, very, very hard. In a city like Dhaka here, I mean, everybody has this philosophy of try to avoid the traffic whenever you can, because it costs you a lot of time. At the same time, I think Bangladesh is also, and it's often partially unfortunately seen like this in the development world, especially because many development organizations are active here. It's often a country where things are tried out also, which simply has to do with the fact that you can reach a lot of people with a solution relatively effortless because of the density. So what I said, for example, before, why is mobile money so highly penetrated here? It's also to do with the country is so densely populated. It's much easier to set up an agent network. Why was microfinance so successful here? It's the same kind of issues. Yes, you don't need to travel that far to reach a good amount of people. So yes, there are, for example, in terms of traffic speed and so on, there are some trade-offs. And yes, it sometimes it is annoying. For example, some of our grids are maybe only 80 kilometers out of Dhaka, but even if you visit those, you need to plan for a one-day trip, like going early in the morning, coming back late in the evening. And usually the thing is like you spend maybe altogether, you spend like maybe 8 to 10 hours in traffic for visiting your grid for 2 hours. So that's for sure a problem. But as I said, the good thing is that population is always around. And that's also how we basically have, for example, designed our grid. We usually always have somebody in the local community who is working for us, who is basically responsible, for example, for maintaining the grid. And these people are usually, at least for Bangladesh, easy to find, because, I mean, if you're talking about, I don't have the exact number in mind, but if you talk about around 1,000 to 2,000, I think it's like, around 2,000 people living on a square kilometer, it also means there will be someone who will be able to fulfill your purposes. So it's also, I mean, all of these things have advantages and disadvantages. But I think, yes, this high population density is something which makes Bangladesh very, very unique and a very, very interesting market. Also, if you look, for example, mobile network penetration is extremely high here. Like the mobile operators, they claim that they have covered 98% of the country, which also simply has to do with the fact it's the economics of a GSM tower make much more sense in a country like Bangladesh, because you reach a good amount of people directly.
True, and from the perspective of Germany, since all of the three founders are from Germany, Germany has invested heavily in sustainable or clean energy, let's say, but at the cost of for the population, because actually, if I recall correctly, Germany has one of the highest cost of electricity in Europe. How does that play, and the fact that also there are so many concerns now on what happened to a solar panel at the end of the cycle? What's your take on that? Is solar still a very valuable way of producing and sustainable energy?
Straightforward, of course, yes. And I also think when you, for example, compare to Germany, yes, and that's what I also said at the beginning, of course, we were very inspired in terms of what happened in Germany. And you also need to see, where do the high electricity costs in Germany come from? The one thing is for sure is that Germany did set up a financing mechanism which allowed private households to participate in it, and which was our feed-in tariff, which also, I mean, had some very positive effects, because yes, we have very high energy costs in Germany, but at the same time, everybody is allowed to participate in this. So it's not only Germany or has the story of you're not only a consumer, you can also be a producer of electricity and get your money for it. So I think it also sets things a little bit different into context. The one part of the cost in Germany, of course, had to do with, I think at the very beginning, we allowed people to sell electricity for around 30 to 40 cents per kilowatt hours. So it was a highly subsidized feed-in tariff. But the nice thing out of this was that many people actually took this on and saw this as an investment case and perceive energy maybe differently now. I would also say very clearly, looking into cost of energy as a consumer, and that's something totally different than looking into the production cost of energy. From a consumer perspective, it's also always a question of how much subsidies go in there and who receives them. Like, for example, Bangladesh is the country where I'm right now, we have one of the lowest electricity tariffs in the world. The tariff I'm paying here, for example, in Dhaka is around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a relatively low tariff. But this is, of course, highly subsidized. And I would by now also even ask the question, and that's something I saw, for example, even when I moved into my apartment here in Bangladesh, is there also a point where energy is maybe too cheap? And there we also see a lot of differences. Yes, it's always like, for example, the question in terms of subsidies for energy and getting the cost down. Who should get these subsidies? Because also, if you look, for example, in the global context, until today, it is usually the case that those who are not part of these nicely, highly subsidized national grids and so on, they pay a fairly high amount for electricity. Yes, that was also, if you go into this whole off-grid context, you talk about people paying up to $10 per kilowatt hour. This is, for example, the case, yes, somebody having a mobile phone going to a shop and saying like, okay, please charge this for me. Then maybe you pay your 20 cents for a mobile phone charge, but if you translate this into a kilowatt hour price, you end up at $10 per kilowatt hour. So it's a typical like penalty for the poverty penalty we see also in the energy world. So all this kind of like looking at energy consumption prices is very, very complex, and you need to take a lot of things there into account. But then looking for sure at the generation cost of energy, at least the information I have, things are very, very clearly pointing towards that solar is actually relatively cheap. I mean, we also need to look a little bit at different kind of use cases. So solar energy coming directly from a panel might be the cheapest source of energy available right now. If you calculate this with, let's say, a 20 years usage time. Yes, you can get down to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. These are, for example, some examples we have seen in India. The problem with off-grid solar is that you need to have a storage, because that is what makes things, of course, very expensive. But then it's also not always fair to look, for example, only at the generation, because getting an energy from point A to B, and that's, for example, the business we are in. Yes, we are more in the business of energy distribution. Distribution costs seem to be the part which are the bigger problem. I mean, I see this in a country even like Bangladesh. Like Bangladesh right now actually produces more electricity than there is demand. But the problem is getting electricity to the point where it is needed. And that's also something we need to take into account if we talk about these typical decentralized energy solutions like solar panel. So even if you would say like a solar home system might be relatively expensive because you need a solar panel and a battery, the nice thing is it is on your rooftop. So your distribution is only a few meters. And it is something different than having maybe a power plant somewhere set up and the energy needs to travel 100 kilometers. So I think there's still something also looking into the research where things are still very, very unclear. What is the best solutions here? There are always still debates. But what I know for sure is that in terms of just looking at the pure generation, solar PV is very, very competitive. It's really just about all these questions of what happens after. And I could also see, that's why I say, you could also look at Germany, for example, in the way of how subsidies are manipulating the consumer prices.
Just one last question for me, Diane, before I hand it over to you again. What's your take on nuclear, if I may ask you?
Well, I have to say I'm very German biased here. I have to say I'm not that familiar with the science behind it and so on. But what remains very shocking for me is always the fact that, I consider nuclear for sure not as a clean energy, because it's always a question what happens with the waste, and nobody knows where to basically put it. And all the solutions I see until today are just put it somewhere where there are no people. But I don't think that's a long-term solution. And the other fact is basically is one fact we know until today is nobody wants to take responsibility for the case when something goes wrong. There's no insurance company in the world or anyone who would finance or reimburse you for the costs when something goes wrong. So it's always like a question of a technology, how far you are able to handle it, but the risks are very, very high. And if we have other solutions available, which might be much, much easier, and that's also maybe one of the advantages of solar energy, because it's a very, very easy technology. So we need to take also more of these things, for example, into account. So I'm not a big fan of nuclear energy, based on that there are too many open questions for me on what happens with the waste, what happens if something goes wrong. But I have to be honest, I wouldn't be able to go into the discussion about an expert on all these different kind of solutions.
I like that you say that you are German biased, because if you were French, for sure, you would have given me a totally different answer, right? Diane, back to you.
Thanks, Stefano. Dennis, so, okay, trying to put a customer lens back on this. So first, shorter question, and then followed up by longer one. So first one is, how does your client base look like right now? It sounds like it can be a mix of people with solar panels, without solar panels. Is it mostly homes? Does it also include businesses? Maybe factories are too much?
Factories are clearly too much, yeah. So our current clients are typically those users who fall in this bracket for solar home systems. So we're talking about, the first thing, of course, we're talking about rural areas in Bangladesh, and typically off-grid areas. By now we also have actually a few grids which are in on-grid areas, because the national grid in Bangladesh also expands very quickly. It's of course based on this geography, and it's not for nothing that Dhaka is, for example, one of the most densely populated cities in the world, is that the income opportunities, of course, in the rural areas are not that the same as in the city. So it's usually, of course, at the lower income level in terms of population, but not everywhere. Because Bangladesh also, you have a lot of inflow from remittances from, for example, the Middle East, which often goes basically into these villages. There's a lot of money flowing from the cities into the villages. So we're not talking about ultra poor, but that's in general something, Bangladesh has also done pretty well in terms of income. So we're not talking about ultra poor, but lower income people. And yes, it's a mix of households and businesses. I have to say, of course, also in our case right now, that the most successful grids we have are more on marketplaces. So these are really like, what you find here in Bangladesh, you usually have, let's say, every 10 kilometers or every 5 to 10 kilometers, you will find a marketplace somewhere or bazaar. So that's basically, you find these small kind of shops, like small welding shops, something where you can buy like your day-to-day goods, like vegetables and so on. Small electronic shops and everything. Solar equipment is actually also something you can buy there, like your panels and your batteries. And yeah, so these are the typical households we are dealing with. And then of course we have yeah, most of the houses we're working with, they actually have a solar home system. But some of them then also don't have one, which is often even also an indication for these are then the lower, I mean, in terms of also looking at our customer base, in our customer base, these are usually the households which are at the lower income end. I would really say like the income is somewhere between 150 to 250 dollar per month. Yeah, so that's in general like the kind of customer base we're looking at.
Got it. And then so I guess if I were let's say a consumer, maybe a mix with, you know, I have a home, if you can walk us through the customer journey, or like what the process is of working with you guys. So I have a solar panel, or maybe I don't have one, you know, how does it start, and then what do I interact with? Sounds like probably somebody comes in and applies a meter somewhere, and maybe some app so I can control, you know, buying or selling.
Yeah, so it's the first thing I have to say is, I mean, we work usually in a B2B approach. So we work with partners here, because as I said at the beginning, Bangladesh was very successful in distributing these solar home systems, and this was all distributed by specialized organizations who did microfinancing plus supply like the panels, the batteries, the appliances you use with it, and so on. Right now, our biggest partner here is Grameen Shakti, so that's an affiliate of the Grameen Bank from Professor Mohammad Yunus, and they have distributed around 1.9 million of these solar home systems. So we are usually working within their ecosystem. So we are basically providing them the technology and the solution, and the process is pretty straightforward. Yes, what they usually do is they go to the different villages or marketplaces, and they just do a first interview with the people, like asking them like, okay, are you currently happy with with your energy supply? Would you like to have more? Would you like to have less? They make just an assessment of a village, just for us to know, like, is it actually a feasible place? It also has to do with very simple mapping, like collecting the GPS location, using Google Maps, and looking like, okay, is this a potential site? And then, of course, comes step number 2. So when we know we have a village which is basically would be viable, just from a technical perspective, then comes the onboarding process. Because the first thing is, of course, no, you cannot go to a single household for a network good. Yes, I mean, that's what our solution is. It's a network. And one household being part of a grid doesn't make it a grid. We are at a standalone system. So we usually say, we won't even consider installing such a grid if we don't get minimum 15 houses on board. The sweet spot here lies more in the direction of 30 to start with. And to make a grid really, really financially viable in the long term, like over 1 or 2 years, it usually should get at 50 connections. And because you need to have a certain amount of trade here, and our business model is also based on this. Yes, we take a commission of, if somebody sells energy, we take a commission of this for using our platform. So as I said, it's never an approach of just going to one household. It's always a community approach. So getting a community on board. And that was also one of the main issues why we said we have to go into this in a B2B approach, working with these organizations who have already been in contact with these communities, because we need to get a good amount of people on board. Luckily in Bangladesh, it's also usually communities are also very centrally organized. So there are usually the typical leaders whom you get on board. And then also we usually try to look for some people who are more interested in technology, like technical aspects of it. So who can also help us convincing other people in the community, explaining them the benefits and so on, which is also not that easy. Yes, it's you need to think about like explain this whole concept of you can now sell electricity is not something that intuitive for the most people we are dealing with. So the general way how we onboard people is telling them, like educating them in terms of the opportunity that they can now use more electricity and in a more flexible way. So at the beginning, when we set up this value proposition of now you can buy more electricity when you want it is much more appealing than telling someone, oh, you could now sell your excess energy, or you can now even start a small energy business, is buy a panel, buy a battery, sell energy. So yeah, so we try to get this minimum of 50 people on board. Then it's really about like getting a signature on a document, because only then you know you're on the safe side. In the best way, also getting a small upfront payment, what you usually have as a connection fee. Yeah, and then it's pretty straightforward. Once you have this critical mass, then usually our B2B partners, they then go there. And let's say the first step then for us is that we do the layout of the grid based on all the information we have. So we do the final layout, provide them a plan, and then they just, for every household which is supposed to be collected, we give them an energy meter, which our B2B partners buy from us. They usually sell it to the end users, might be on a 3-month financing scheme. Yeah, and then it's really straightforward. There goes a small meter into the house. 1 meter can be connected to 3 other houses, and it's a mesh network. In terms of
may I ask you, how do you do the payout when someone sells the power on the grid? Through the mobile network, you use the wallet that belong to the mobile partner.
So how it works, and it was also now going to the second part of Diane's question in terms of how does the user interact. No, we don't provide them a mobile app or anything. Everything we have is on our meter, we have a small display. And that's the point of interaction. And this display has the main function that it, on the one hand, shows you the meter shows you are you buying or selling. You could see on the display on how much, in terms of what, yes, how much is going out, how much is going into it. But the most important thing is you have money, you have an actual Dhaka. I mean, Dhaka is the local currency in Bangladesh, so you have a balance on it. So it's a prepaid scheme. So if you want to buy electricity, what people do is, with their mobile phone, using the mobile money channel, they top up their meter. So the money basically is credited on their meter.
Oh.
And now they can start buying the electricity from the neighbor. And then it's a very straightforward concept. So energy goes out of your meter.
The meter is a wallet, sort of.
Exactly. And that is also a very interesting case, because actually until today, people haven't cashed out that much. Because it seems to them very appealing to, I mean, some actually really see it as a saving account, because it's, for some reason, and it's something we are still trying to look into in terms of, let's say, in terms of product design and so on. There seems to be something appealing for the people that they have a device in their house with a display, and from there they can always see how much Dhaka do they have on it. And if you, for example, sell electricity, yes, your meter goes up, so you're earning money. So you have some money saved somewhere. You know you could cash it out at one point, which is also for us, of course, a very critical moment. And that's where it really works in the way like a customer would notify us. So right now we really still do it based on a phone call, like they call us and they say, like, okay, this is my meter. I would like to cash out, let's say, for example, 500 Dhaka. And then we transfer them the money back into their mobile wallet. And then they can use it again they can go to a marketplace, buy something for it, or go to an agent and get the money in cash. But yeah, it's really, I mean, it's really good for us how it works in Bangladesh with this whole ecosystem. And the other thing is really also this whole concept of, which is amazing in Bangladesh, is that people really easily can also take out money from their mobile wallet, because you really, like in every village, you have these agents sitting around. And the people can just go there and say, like, here, I have my 500 Dhaka on you. Can you please give me the money in cash? And these things happen very, very fast and very seamlessly. So it makes it pretty easy for us, that part.
So the meter has a SIM card in it in order to get the data from the...
Yeah, so the meter is a normal IoT device. What we decided for is each meter has a Wi-Fi module. So we communicate via Wi-Fi to one centralized Wi-Fi tower. And this then again communicates via GSM to our server. Which also brought us to a relatively nice business case, because we're also looking into it in the way of, because people are actually interested in getting access to this Wi-Fi tower for using data. for themselves, for logging in with their smartphone or something like that. Because we found a small advantage with this Wi-Fi tower, because it's really like a 5-meter high tower. It has a relatively strong GSM antenna, so we have a better reception than you would have with your mobile phone.
Wow.
So we actually saw that our Wi-Fi tower is also some kind of extension of a 3G or 4G signal. Yes, the signal you would need in order to transfer data. I mean, we can work on 2G too. That is sufficient for our meters to communicate. But that's also something we are looking into it, like in terms of this whole communication infrastructure. That's actually also a case for potentially giving internet access to people.
Interesting.
Oh, this is so fascinating. I mean, I feel like we've unlocked a box of like a lot more questions to ask, and we're already running out of time. I think what I want to call out, I guess, based on what you were saying, you know, what's fascinating about what you said, that the finance is really taking the lead in terms of you know, installing of the solar pieces, where, for example, in Kenya, where it's kind of similar situation, you know, quite a dense population as well. Mobile money is, you know, widely penetrated here in the 90-something% as well. But, you know, the solar companies are the ones taking the lead, and, you know, distributing the solar panels and whatnot, and working maybe with some banks in the background. And the finance guys are not really at the forefront of this. And I think it's smart that you guys are actually working in a B2B aspect, so you don't actually have to build your own agent network, because like you said, agent networks are already, you know, plentiful there. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And then the other thing about the not needing an app and just everything being in the meter itself, you know, that's very developing world proof. You know, you don't need people to have advanced phones or whatnot, people to have data or anything like that. Just get the meter and everything is done on there. And it's fascinating how it's also then, you know, this is where the strong finance piece comes in, where now it's operating as a wallet. And I can see, Stefano, your eyes lighting up, because Stefano runs an e-wallet, sort of, maybe I'm butchering it, but, you know, fintech as well, that's piloted in Uganda. So actually, I want to pass it back to you, Stefano, to bombard Daniel with your questions.
I like a lot the idea of having the screen that is like a constantly visible bank statement that they can look at and see that they are making money. That's so powerful in a developing country, but also in a developed country, I would say. The idea of keeping an eye on your wealth, on your growing wealth. And yep, it's genius. It's really, really powerful as a concept. I see many projects trying to develop something along that line, but kind of polluting the idea by wanting to put it on blockchain with a crypto token and making the barrier to the entry very, very sharp, and somehow failing, or like, let's say, not succeeding at growing organically, because then they have to involve the monetary authority of the country. They have to register as a store of value. They have to get themselves approved as a wallet. Does all these apply to you as well? Like this wallet meter that they have, are you regulated under, I don't know, store value facility under the Central Bank of Bangladesh? How does it work?
Or is there no regulation, like you were saying? Regulations yet to catch up with the innovation.
No, I mean, there are two aspects in terms of regulation, at least for us here in Bangladesh. So the one thing is energy sales and buy. Yes, if you look, for example, at all these like Western country solutions right now, which also look into peer-to-peer trading and all of them come with blockchain, has a lot to do with the fact that the energy markets in the Western countries are maybe some of the most regulated markets in the world. Which has to do with the whole fact of long-term investment. Like a power plant is a 30 years investment, and you're talking about many $1 million. So whoever does this investment, you want to have certain kind of regulations in place, and they are very static, because these investments take for such a long time. So if you try to do peer-to-peer in the Western market, in the Western energy market, you have to deal with a lot of regulation, and all the companies are working in there. And I think that's where many companies perceive that there is a need for blockchain in order to make things transparent and traceable. Yes, they need to be able to prove every single transaction, who has earned how much and at which point. And that was for us for sure not the case, because we come into a green field. I mean, we are off-grid, first of all. Second thing is that in this case right now for us, Bangladesh has a policy of if you're below 250 kilowatts in terms of generation size, there is no regulation for you on for which price can you sell electricity for whom and so on. So these are usually where off-grid regulations are usually somehow often hampering business model, because that's in our case. That's the main case for us was basically, yes, we put up a platform, that's not a problem. You can enable people to buy and sell, but is the person selling electricity actually allowed to do this, to sell it to your neighbor? What about the taxation involved in there? What about, I mean, somebody's generating income. Do I get value added tax for this? All these kind of things come in there. And that's where we were very lucky that we fell under this threshold, because we don't have a single household in our grid which gets higher than this 250 kilowatt. So that made it very, very easy for us. The other thing is that, as I said, luckily in Bangladesh, we could fully piggyback on a already existing payment solution. So we are working in, for example, within the system of a mobile money provider, and they are fully regulated. And all our all our payments are channeled through their system. So that basically put us into a position where we are not the payment provider. I mean, we do billing between the houses, but the payments in the end are channeled through a payment solution which is already fully regulated, fully accredited, and we don't need to deal with it. So that's really for us was like why Bangladesh was such a nice case, was there were many things we just don't need to take care of, and there are already existing players who have this as their main business. And then I think there's the last part is what I really need to say is peer-to-peer energy trading in Western countries often requires technologies like blockchain because you're using a third-party grid. Yes, it's basically in how these grids, it's about ownership and so on. So if I would take, for example, would have this in Germany, let's say a household in the south of Germany would sell energy to a household in the north of Germany. You might be using the infrastructures of 5 or 6 different players until the energy would physically go there. So you somehow need to be embedded in the system. But in our case, it's a local grid. It's even in a physical way, we have peer-to-peer connections because it's a mesh network. So we don't need blockchain in order to see like who has sold electricity to whom at which moment. So we can get all these layers out. And I mean, we have been approached pretty often in terms of why don't you use blockchain? And I think in terms of fundraising, we could have pushed a lot of buttons there because, you know, at one point blockchain is like, everybody was like, oh, blockchain, 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 and money is just coming from investors. It's the moment you use this word. But in our case, we also said that our people are not using that much of electricity. Yes, let's say an average solar system in Bangladesh is the 50-watt peak panel, like a 50-watt system. So you're not generating that much of electricity. And blockchain needs a certain amount of computation power. And we were also looking into, okay, we could have made each of our energy meters like a micro server. It's like a micro point in each grid. But then basically the self-consumption would have gone up. And things like that. And then it would be a question like energy is so scarce in these community we're working with, and so like it's a good in high demand. Should you really use this energy to power a blockchain model? So all of these aspects also came there into play. Amazing. So our final decision was very clearly, it's a nice concept. I myself personally dealt with it a lot, and I like the idea of blockchain and this distributed accounting, but we simply didn't need it. That's why
and also I guess that you raised 1.5 million US dollars, and you are currently doing another round for 2.75 million dollars, if I recall correctly. So I guess investors were interested in your idea with or without blockchain. Of course, you could have capitalized maybe between 2018 and late 2017, early 2018. You probably could have tripled your raise, but then probably you would have been stuck in a system that was meant to generate electricity, but then consume electricity, or complicate things because they will have to KYC, they will have to generate a token, and basically you complicate something that was already straightforward and simple, and all the financial part was taken care by existing licensed partners. And so probably you did the right choice in just going with traditional investment. Would you like to talk a bit about the investors that have believed in your vision and who are your current partners?
Yeah. So, I mean, we did this investment round in 2018. It was actually, to be precise, was 1.7 million we raised then. And this basically was a result that at this point we were part of a global accelerator for energy startups, which is driven by 10 of the biggest utilities in the world. And we actually won that whole competition and the whole accelerator. And then two of these bigger utilities, one is Innogy, which is a German utility, one of the bigger German utilities, more focused on renewable energies, and EDP, which is the biggest utility in Portugal. I mean, they're also active in Brazil. And then our third major investor was Asia IIX. So that's an impact investment exchange. So that's an impact investor from Singapore. But as you see, I mean, we were actually able to win this whole competition, like this energy startup competition, as well as actually convince these utilities to get on board. And I have to be very straightforward, at least the two utilities that came, they were not that interested in the market we are working in. As they're not that much interested in off-grid energy or in the development impact or the social aspect we are having here. But what we were able to convince them is, and there we go back to also the previous part we discussed about, is telling them, like, we do peer-to-peer energy trading in an unregulated market. Because if you look at all these challenges you have in order to put up peer-to-peer in their markets, they have these technology challenges, regulatory, and so on. But the really interesting part, looking at our energy markets, really comes with the point, like, what actually happens if you have an energy market where every single point can generate electricity, is allowed to sell, can buy electricity, has a solar panel, and has a storage. So we have a combination of how many people say, like, oh, this is how a grid might look like in the future. But we actually have these kind of grids installed in the rural areas of Bangladesh in an unregulated environment. And we're actually, I mean, that was the other part, of course, we are solving a direct problem. Like, we are not doing this for fun or as an experiment. We are saying, no, we're doing this because people actually want this solution and they want it now. So there will be, it's not very hard for us to convince our users to participate in the energy market. But now come all these interesting things which we could pitch to them, like saying, for example, okay, how does dynamic pricing work in such a model? How do people react to changing energy prices? How much information can they actually actively take? How much information, like processing, should be automated? So we have, for example, this trade-off of, and that was an experience we made very early, was, for example, should the people trade actively? Because they can do it. Yes, they can go to the energy meter and say, for example, now I buy electricity, now I sell it. But you're not standing next to the energy meter all the time and being ready to press a button. Or should this be in an automated mode? But how do you basically learn, like, when does a household want electricity and when not? And as I said, I think one of the most amazing aspects in there was that we have storages in there. Like, every solar home system comes with a storage. So we are basically, we're having this total, and as I said, the next thing is that payments are already fully digitalized. Like, this is more advanced than the energy meter or the energy system my parents are using back in Germany, because they still get I mean, we have a prepaid meter in our Bangladesh case where people just top it up within seconds from their mobile phone. For my parents, it still works like, yes, I mean, once per year, and it's actually really the case. Somebody comes and physically reads the meter, and it's like, it's in terms of possibilities, much more is possible, but it's really like putting these things on the ground and making it work. So I think that was the main pitch we could give to these utilities, and they actually, yeah, they believed in this idea, and they're still believing in it. It's really, it's maybe not that much about like for them, it's not that much about the context we are in. As I said, so they're not too much interested in the development context, but it's really about thinking how these markets look like and how dynamic they are and how much possibilities we have right now in order to really regulate these markets. That's why I also said at the beginning, right now our main role is we are a market regulator. And I know, for example, that one of the utilities, I mean, both of them are have rules in Europe. And I mean, right now, for example, on the European level, we are discussing about how could basically a regulation for peer-to-peer energy trading look like? But you don't have the use cases. So there is actually also this opportunity, what we said, this typical, is turning the world upside down and saying like, no, now the global north will learn from the global south. I think this is one of the cases we have here, where it's basically like, yes, Bangladesh leapfrogged. People directly went to distributed energy system, directly went to paying their bills and so on from the mobile phone. So they have everything in place. And now let's see how an energy infrastructure looks in this context. So it's, yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing. It's something which is for me very exciting, and where I'm the biggest part or the most enjoyable part of my work, really looking at these like amazing and new energy markets.
And can tell also from your website, you have a section called "What Keep Us Going," right? There is a lot of passion in what you're doing.
Wow. Really, I'm so excited to hear about this. This is so invigorating. You know, like that's exactly what entrepreneurs try to do, and then you move to a developing nation and you leapfrog that nation forward, and then now, you know, other developed countries can use this as a use case and follow through. And it's so smart how you're basically flying under the radar to do this work, so you can move fast and, you know, figure out the market, what regulations would make sense before, you know, the government or whatnot, other parties come in. This is so brilliant. So question for you, what's, in terms of looking in the future, what are future plans? Is Kenya part of the plan at all in some point?
Well, I mean, yes, for sure. I mean, the one thing is, I mean, looking at the way how we do it here in Bangladesh, that's why I said we knew that we always need a partner, who basically someone who distributes solar home system, also someone being active in the financing space. And Kenya is for sure looking at off-grid distribution, especially the solar home system. Kenya is one of the most prominent markets. And I mean, just looking at Kenya's players like M-Pesa and M-Kopa, so we also know that, yeah, in the African context, you have a lot of these payment mechanisms in place, which I said is very important for us. So for sure, for the future, and we're actually already often getting requests, East African, Sub-Saharan, and so on. These markets are very attractive for us. I also said that we have one of our investors is EDP, who is active in Latin America. So these are also markets we try to look at. And I mean, we see ourselves basically in the role of, yes, I mean, we are a platform provider. We develop technology, trying to do it in a way that it can be used by a B2B partner. But right now we are still, I mean, we still need to be too actively involved in there. Yes, it's like our whole engineering team, everyone is here in Dhaka. It's not like the things just go already in the way like we would ship like the meters to someone, say, for example, okay, here's the mobile app for the grid operator, download this and then just start using it. I mean, we would need to do all these like trainings and so on. And we right now simply don't have the capacity for it. But yeah, I mean, looking into the problem we are trying to solve and tackling the problem of energy poverty, it's very, very obvious for us that the African market will be something very interesting for us. The moment we are confident enough that we can really more or less manage things as remotely as possible, which is for us required. but also to directly put it on top. I mean, the other potential we see also is in the future also thinking about developed countries. It's like, I mean, thinking about markets like Europe and so on, because what we really need to distinguish for our solution is we have a hardware layer. That's something we're building ourselves right now, which is the energy meter, maybe the most prominent part in there. But in general, like once you have figured out, for example, how energy trading works, what are, for example, the algorithms you need to, or the information you need to provide to a meter in terms of when should it buy, when should it sell. You learn like when do people want electricity and so on. So automating these processes is something we also would see as a potential applying this in a developed country. And I know that some of our investors are also interested in that part, basically trying to sooner or later also pulling us into these markets.
Wow. Stefano, passing back to you. It's just everything, I could see the future before my eyes just listening to you.
we have taken 1 hour of Daniel's time. I think that's probably the longest podcast episode, yeah. We would like to let you close the episode, Daniel. Say whatever you wish to say to investors, partners, or whoever is the stakeholder that you wish to talk to in our audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity. I mean, I think I have a very clear audience because, as you said, we're currently in the journey of also doing another round of fundraising. So we're actively involved in that. So yeah, if there's any potential investor looking at it, and it doesn't always need to be a big investor. And if you would like to learn with us about a new energy world, or at least the way how we're seeing it, and trying to explore a little bit like all these kind of opportunities and lessons learned you can get out of our platforms. But also, of course, always keeping in mind that we're trying to solve a really imminent problem today. It would be really great if somebody listening, reaching out to us. Check our website, please check our work, and we'd be happy to hear from some people.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to being in this new world that you're talking about with this energy sharing and, you know, this future. I'm just so excited.
Thanks a lot, Diane. And thanks a lot, Stefano.
Thanks.